Because we have the fabulous Travis Alabanza with us today, everyone. Oh, come on. I am incredibly excited to get to host this evening, to ask them some questions, and then to be taking some of your questions later. But I think first, I should probably introduce them. Because there are so many brilliant things, I've got it written down. Always feels very odd to be like, Travis is there, but I'm going to be like, Travis... Thanks, Travis. Travis Alabanza is an award-winning writer, performer and theatre maker. After being the youngest recipient of the Artists in Residency programme at the Tate Galleries, Alabanza's debut show Burgers toured internationally to two sold-out performances in the South Bank Centre, Sao Paulo, Brazil, Hao and Berlin, and won the Edinburgh Fringe Total Theatre Award. In 2020, their show Overflow debuted at the Bush Theatre to widespread acclaim and later streamed online in 20 countries. Their writing has appeared in The Guardian, Vice, Galdem and BBC Online, and previously they had a fortnightly column in Metro. They have been published in numerous anthologies, including Black and Gay in the UK. Their work surrounding gender and trans identity has garnered international recognition, and we are thrilled to have them at Lighthouse Bookshop today to talk about their stunning book, None of the Above. So, yeah, go on. I think we should be really happy. This is gorgeous, it's beautiful. How exciting. So, without further ado, Travis, would you like to read us a little bit of your book?
Amazing, yeah. Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. I feel like the bio should have just said Travis is wearing a Scottish tartan. Yeah, and that would just be it, really, you know. I had a 15-minute quick change because of the trains, and I knew that this was the skirt to do today, so...
On behalf of Scotland, I'm very proud of you.
Is it like, we'll figure that out. I want to figure out the question I would love to know when we go to Q&A before whoever asks the first question. Just tell me if it's beggy to wear tartan when you're in Scotland. Like, just Scottish people look at you like, really, girl? So yeah, I'm going to read from the book and then we're going to chat. Great. I do not want to base my transness on cisgender people's definition of it. I do not want to define myself in relation only to them. I do not want to play by their rules of what my gender should look like. If my transness is a gift, let it be protected by those who will cherish it. This is for us, baby, not for them. In my dream, I am about to call the doctor, the one I spoke to last time. I want to apologize for not turning up to our appointment and explain I just had to figure out what I wanted. I repeat to myself before I call him, this is for us, baby, not for them. And as I'm about to repeat it for the 5th time, he finally answers. We talk, and he asks me if I have always felt this distress, if I have always known you are who you say you are. I tell him I still don't know, but I do not think that is unique to me. I am sure you do not know either. In this dream, I can see my face, but it is constantly changing. The hair grows and then is shaved. The shape is round and then square. My jaw elongates and then shrinks. But it does not feel frightening. The change goes in and out the way a tide would, with warning and care, like you know it is about to happen. The change feels as natural as the sea, almost like it is supposed to be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Travis. What a beautiful way to start. Thank you so much for reading that for us. So, I have the absolute pleasure of asking you some questions. And the first one, quite a general one, I thought keep it broad to start. So you've obviously been very successful in performance theatre, performance poetry, you're here, there and everywhere with it. You have written for Page before, but in sort of shorter formats. What made you think, I want to write a book?
I'll keep it real. The pandemic meant that I couldn't perform anymore. You know, I was lucky that 2020 was going to be a year where Burgers was really popping off, and I just got excited midway. You heard the gasp. That was because my lighting designer of Burgers is here, la la, and I didn't know you were so I'm just gagged. So I was, I was going to be touring for a whole year, and obviously that meant that for the first year of like my life freelancing, I was like, damn, bish, I ain't worried about finding jobs. And then obviously the pandemic happened, and I always have wanted to write a book, but I've always been like, well, I don't want to do it when I'm rushing round. And I thought in my head, oh, I'll do it when I'm a bit older and I'm bored of performing or my knees don't work. And then And then I realised that obviously this was going to be the time, and so I felt like I wanted to... The thing about a performance, right, is you do it and people that were there experience it and then it goes, and that's really beautiful. That's what makes performance so special. But I felt like people were asking me loads of questions about gender that I wanted to be like, oh, if you saw my show, you would have heard this. And the thing about a book is it's there forever, and I felt like it's one of the most powerful archives to have, and I'm quite obsessed with the archive. A lot of my work looks at what's missing from an archive, and I knew that the UK was missing. There is other writing, of course, from racialized trans people, but I felt like I could write something that might appear in more mainstream places, but give a dialogue and a context to being a racialized trans person that I didn't think had existed recently that I could see. And so that's kind of how None of the Above was coming along, yeah.
Oh, it all makes so much sense. Love the honesty.
Yeah, I mean, well, I had my work. No.
Like, so did we. None of us did. So, how did you find it different? Like, you're obviously very creative. You're used to producing stuff all the time. You're used to working through new material. How did you find moving into something where you have to sort of sit with the same thing for a very long time?
It was so hard. It was really hard, but also I think, it was hard because I think I didn't have anyone around to kind of bounce off material in the same way, but also it was hard because you can't run from yourself when you're writing a book like this. And so normally when you're writing a show or something like that, it doesn't take as long. So you are sitting with yourself for 2 or 3 months and then it's done. And this was like, over a year of just like sitting through these questions. But also because of that knowing of it being there forever, I was like, this needs to be really shit hot. This needs to be a really good piece of work that I'm going to feel proud of in years to come. And I think that makes it really difficult. But luckily, like, my first love was books. Like, my first love wasn't theatre. I didn't go to the theatre much as a kid. Like, I didn't go and watch performances. I didn't know that was a thing. I kind of fell into that. But what I did have was my mum would always take us to the library, partly because our library also offered, like, childcare. But it meant that I would go and just read all the time. And so, although it was scary, I think actually it was the first time I took a project on that I actually was like, well, I've done a lot of research my whole life on what I like about books, what I don't like, what my taste is. This felt, when I'm doing theatre, it's like, how do I make theatre when I hate most of it? Whereas, like, happy fringe, everyone. Don't know anyone. Yeah. But with a book, it's like, wait, I know what I love about books. I've read so many books. I love reading. This could guide me through it. So every time I felt lost, I just thought about what books have excited me and what books I love, and then I also, would text my friends that have really cool books out and be like, what was it like week 4? What was it like week 7 for you writing? And they were like, horrible. Or if I'm like, okay, I'm on track.
I can't wait to come back to asking you about like who inspires you, but I feel like we're here for you. So audience, remember that for Q&A if I forget. So you've mentioned the archive already, and you're clearly in the book incredibly self-aware of where the book might sit within sort of queer trans histories. And you obviously you started writing it a couple of years ago. How does it feel now that we're here, that already it is going, this very moment is a moment in queer trans history? How does that sort of feel to know that you've done, your eyes have gone up, whoa, how does that feel?
Well, we needed more high boots in historical archives, so I feel very glad to give that representation. I think what I mentioned in the book is that none of this is new. And I think that takes the pressure off of how you might feel in these moments. This is just a version of something that has existed for lots of time, and this is what it looks like in this year and in this particular moment with trans people. I think resisting the urge, like, I'm presenting a new way of saying something. I do think that, like, it's a unique telling of a book. But because I love history and because I love the archive, you get kind of, I think I even say it in the book, like, history can be a balm for you because you can see that other people have done this in other ways. Maybe they've done it in political speeches, or maybe they've done it as drag performances, or maybe they've done it as rallies or art pieces. But black and brown transgender non-conforming people have been using creative expression for years and years and years to tell about our experience. So that's calming, right? Because it goes, okay, I'm just part of this wider web of things, But also, I won't lie, I think a big part of why I wanted to put these politics out is because I felt like the literature that's building around transness was doing lots of great things about explaining to cisgender people about us and explaining what might be, and that, you know, there's non-binary books out there that do a great job of giving them to, you know, audience and parents that can learn about pronouns, etc. But this book isn't that, right? This book is trying to... All the books I love ask questions. All the books I love are about wrestling with something deeper and more nuanced. And I love that this book doesn't really position itself as an educational handbook. This book is trying to position itself as like a philosophical text about my transness and where it goes next. And that feels really exciting because it feels like it joins a wider lineage of other black queer work that's maybe not trans, that is about those kind of things, or black feminist thought, that maybe we haven't had trans people be able to do that in this country yet. So it's exciting, and I can only promise to do it with glam.
Well, you are succeeding, obviously.
Yeah. Fished for that one, didn't I?
You did, but you got it anyway. I'll give you it. It's your day. So, obviously, you're talking about nuance, and your book is so nuanced for those who haven't read it yet. And something that really struck me about the nature of that nuance was also the vulnerability of it, your capacity to be very open with how you're not necessarily 100% sure all of the time, and that's something you don't get to see, and you're very self-aware of that, again, of it within trans literature and within conversations around transness. How did it feel to be so vulnerable in something, as you say, that is so fixed, and to be so honest?
Yeah, well, I think in the prologue, spoiler alert, that I say that I actually started writing a whole different book. I actually started writing that very book that I just spoke about because I thought that's what we had to do. And that was a safer option for me because it could lodge itself in this position of, I'm the teacher and you're learning. And it makes lots of assumptions about both them and me. The assumption to other people is that they can't hold also my questions, or that we don't learn from other people's confusion. But it makes the assumption about me that I know everything to teach. Well, conveniently, at the same time as writing the book, I was having a gender crisis. And I said to my friend, well, how can I write this tell-all about non-binary when I'm not sure if in 2 years I'm going to be using that word for myself. I'm not sure in 2 years if I'm going to be saying that I am even trans. At one point, that's what I was thinking about. And all my friends were like, girl, I don't know if you can do that. And I was like, right, the risk is a bit higher if I start saying all these things are so static and I'm sure of all these things. And then by the time the book comes out, I'm like hiding my face because I'm like not that, right? And then I realized that all these conversations I was having with other trans people on the phone during lockdown were full of doubt, full of questions, full of unsurety, full of all these things that they felt they couldn't say. And every preface would be like, before they'd say it, well, obviously I would never tell people this, or obviously I would never tweet this, or obviously I would never go out front with this. And I thought about how doubt and being wrong and changing your mind is a natural part of all our human experiences. And then I thought about how a side effect of oppression often is to make people two-dimensional and lose all the edges of who you are. And one of those edges is the ability to be not sure and to be doubtful. And it makes sense, right? Transness is so heavily persecuted at the moment that, of course, that means we're going to tighten up. But I don't go to art to do what I have to do in public. I go to art to be able to play out other things that aren't safe enough to do. That's why I go on stage and do all these, you know, invite a white cis man to make a burger with me, right? Like, that's, I ain't doing that in real life.
Can't think why.
Yeah. Not good dinner company. But then why would I go to a book to replicate the same dynamic I was in a chokehold in real life if we can't use art to express a different thing? So I said, what am I missing right now? And I think a lot of people say this book is about gender, it's about non-binary, and all these things are true, but to me the book is actually about doubt, and it's about change, and being allowed to change your mind, and what happens when you start growing into a contradiction of your past self. And that felt so freeing to write, because I felt like previously to that, myself, and by the sounds of it, a lot of my friends and other people in the community felt like we couldn't do that. So yeah, that's why I wanted to do it.
Makes perfect sense. And to sort of lead on from that, and the honesty about doubt and the vulnerability that comes with that, something that really struck me about the book is the capacity for forgiveness that you hold throughout it for those who have said and done horrible things. Do you think that your own doubt and the capacity, the sort of quite amazing capacity you have to be open with that, allows you to hold that level of forgiveness? How do you do that?
Well, look, this is my best self, so I'm not trying to put out a shit version of myself, you know? Like, I haven't always got that capacity for forgiveness, right? I haven't always got that patience. Maybe the first edit was like, you fucking wanker, and then the second edit, no, but again, it kind of links back to the first response of, like, art is about, for me anyway, art is about imagining a version of yourself that isn't present in the real life, right? You've got this time and luxury to create work. And so, if in real life I don't have as much empathy for this person, what does sitting around and having time to think about can do? And also, I was writing this at a time when we were all really online, even more so than we are normally, and I felt an overwhelming sense of lack of hope by seeing how polarizing everything was becoming, right? Not just like left or right, in the left and in the right, just it felt like we were just constantly saying to people, you're wrong and I'm right. And that just fills me with like the least amount of hope possible. I'm not going to use all the buzzwords like cancel culture. I think it's much deeper than that. It just felt like we were all really scared, and our version of being scared was going like, I'm great and this person's worse than me. And obviously also I was writing this post like June 2020, which was a really intense time, but also a time where I was mainly observing and just observing how much all of us, no matter what our identities were just creating these walls around ourselves, which was basically like, I only want the people around me that fit all these very strict ways of being good or bad. And I said, if I finish this book, the one thing I don't want it to be is that I'm good and this person's bad, or like, I'm trans and I'm right and this person's cis and they're wrong. That's not to say that cis people are let off the hook, right? Cis people have so much power to make a better world for trans people. But the book is more about the gender binary, which doesn't just harm trans people, right? It harms all people. And in order for us to like really get to that point, I had to make sure that I wasn't always seen as a victim and someone else wasn't seen as a perpetrator, but we were all victims of the gender binary. And that comes across like this for me, but it might come across like this for someone else. And I was trying to build solidarity, and I don't think that the most successful way to build solidarity is to create a good v bad. I don't know, I think it's a natural response, and it's not me going, you shouldn't have that response. Again, this is my best self, right? There's times when I take out the earrings and say, let's go. But, oh, you liked that one. But this wasn't that time to do that. Again, I think it's about knowing that something will last forever and the legacy you want to leave. Legacy feels a bit grand, but you know, the thing you want to leave.
Say legacy.
Yeah, legacy.
Thinking of that and how the sort of gender binary and wider patriarchy harms everybody and has the capacity to harm everybody. One of the most interesting things in your book is Steve, a character who I'll let you explain. Your eyes lit up.
Every time, I love that he's got this moment.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
So, well, where do you hope Steve is now? Is the question I wanted to ask, but. Just tell them about Steve.
He might be on the fourth row, you never know. I can't see past the second row, I've got bad eyes. So, Steve, hi. But we've changed his name, so you might not know. But Steve, I keep on saying spoiler, but like, yeah, this is a story, but I say it better in the book. I wanted to think of it, when I started writing the book, so the book split up into 7 phrases. Each chapter is a different phrase. And I did that so that I could work to my strengths, which was like writing scenes and writing like into those things. So we start at a scene and then we zoom out into the analysis of that and what we can learn about gender through that. And the scene, I guess, that's painted in chapter 3, which the quote is, ladies and gentlemen and those lucky enough to transcend gender, which is a quote from the iconic David Hoyle performance artist that, yes, exactly, who, you know, does that phrase at all of his shows. And I wanted to think of, like, what stories can I think of that really show that we're lucky as trans people, that we're not just constantly the ones to look at and pity, that actually we hold gifts. And that David, at the time when he was saying these phrases, identified as cis. I don't know how he identifies now, but he could even see this luckiness that we hold, right? Also, I liked the phrase because it's better than all these other clunky ways to try and include, you know, everyone. Suddenly everyone's saying folks. And I'm like, my mum's American, so it's like, that's an American phrase, but from like the uncool Americans. And suddenly all these English people are going, hello folks. And I was like, oh. And so I just love that David Hoyle makes gender inclusivity cool. Sorry, folks, if that offended anyone. But there's this story about Steve. So before I was writing more, I used to perform in clubs mainly, and I would perform like 6 or 7 times a week in queer clubs, do cabaret and things like that. Oh, I'm hosting a cabaret tonight at the Roundabout, 11:30. If anyone wants to come, yes, there's amazing.
You all want to go. You definitely all want to go.
If you want more of that side, it's there tonight, 11:30. Anyway, so Steve would come to all of my shows, right? But he would sit on his own, and he was straight, and I knew this because of the shoes he was wearing. But no, he told me he was straight, and he would be honest. And at this time, I didn't have much of a wider audience, right? So it was odd that like a straight guy was coming to my shows all the time. And one day he came with who I later found was his wife, and there was a pang of jealousy. I kind of explore that in the book, and just in one line, I think I started to develop a bit of like feelings for, I don't know, I was just obsessed with him. I wondered who this guy was that was coming to my shows, would come up and say thank you, then say I'm sorry, I'm straight, and then walk off. Yeah. He was a very interesting character. And then he came one time with his wife and he showed me his nails and they were painted this like bright neon. And he said, look. And his wife kind of took over the conversation and said, this is what you did. You gave me the confidence to paint my nails. And at first I felt really, touched by this. This was beautiful. And that's where the luckiness comes in, right? That from Steve seeing a trans person be celebrated, he also could find his own freedom as a cis man. And I say that in the book. I say this shows a really clear point about gender, right? That trans people bring wealth into society, right? That trans people actually let us all experience gender in better and more expansive ways. But then it turned in the sense that his wife then explained that they've been discussing whether or not Steve could do this for 4 or 5 years, and that they had been wondering whether or not Steve could do this and she would still be attracted to him. And she said this, and she said, but she was saying this all with a smile and said, but then we decided it was okay. And I could see Steve's energy shift and be a bit more embarrassed, and he thanked me and he left. I've not seen him since. But I use this illustration in the book to show twofold of what I just said before about gender nonconformity being the gift, but that also a way to show that gender the binary harms all of us, but that also when you go away from being a successful man or a successful woman, you lose power, you lose desirability, you lose love. But when we're making these questions about gender, it's not just losing a sense of authenticity, but there's material effects to what happens when you break the gender binary. And that trans people are showing that we are choosing authenticity over our safety. And that here you could see this cis straight man, all he wanted to do was paint his nails, and this relationship that he had built up was going to crumble from that. And it tells me how fragile gender is, how fragile malehood is, how fragile the binary is, that it could just fall at what I see as a simple action. And I think the reason I love that story and why every person that's asked questions brings it up is because I just think that we know this. Like, we've all had men in our life. Like, it's not new. Like, none of that is new. We know. We've heard the conversations with men about their genders. And therefore, why does that get missed out in all this conversation around trans people? We make trans people the villains. We make our trans discussion over there, right? It's a very successful media tactic to say trans issues are this separate thing. They're bugging us to do this. Because if we actually opened our eyes and saw that actually transness is a relational thing to the gender binary, I like to see it as trans people are just being honest and cis people are being dishonest, right? That actually in an honest world, everyone would be far less cisgender, everyone would be far less strict about what they're doing. But there's so many things that men and women do in secret to feel about their gender, and Steve was just one example of that.
I had to ask about Steve for that very reason.
I just rambled in there, but
no, I love it. Yeah. It's your book launch. You talk as much as you want. To move it slightly in a different direction, the book obviously isn't just about love this. Love relationship.
Like 30 minutes before, so we go. Yeah.
It's gorgeous. The book obviously isn't just about gender. It's about, I think, something that makes it so interesting. Speaking as a person of colour, it's something you see so rarely, is something that explores the intersection of and gender, and then obviously you explore class within that as well, and the way those three things shift for you in such fascinating, often heartbreaking ways, and sometimes joyous. It's something that really struck me about it. I just wondered if you'd want to expand on, like, how did you manage to navigate those spaces?
Yeah. I think as someone that reads a lot and as someone that's invested in trans work and cares about the landscape of trans art in the UK so deeply, I am always supporting all trans people and sharing and wanting to platform their work. And I saw this pattern of like, why is every book I'm sharing by a trans person white? And obviously that is not the case. There has been incredible, I mean, Scottish authors as well, huge trans POC Scottish authors coming through, but also we've seen, you know, Jay Bernard's poetry book, Surge, is one of my favourite books, and it's incredible. So there are trans artists of colour out there, but I felt like the books that were being pushed out loads were from white trans authors that were still important, but whiteness is, you can't separate race from gender. Feminists have been saying this for years, and transness should be no different from that, right? Gender was a whole racial project in its first place. How we're experiencing gender right now was done in tandem with British colonial projects. And what I mean by that is that from places that my ancestors are from, gender looked very different, right? And I can't separate this anti-trans movement from whiteness, because there's a reason I think it's so pertinent in Britain, because Britain has such a it is colonial, right? Like Britain, that's their OG thing, right? That's like what they do really well. You know, fish and chips, colonizing. And then like, I think that I can't separate those things, so the book couldn't either, right? And in the negative way, that means like I had to, again, as a history nerd, people often say, oh, well, this thing is so new. How do we get our heads around something so new? Or trans people are imposing their new way of thinking. Well, you look at history and this is not new. You look at beyond Western constructs of gender, this is a very ancient practice to be away with this. It's a very ancestral practice to say, I am more than man or woman. Man or woman as boxes was imported. It existed in different ways and gender expectations were there, but you can see direct archives that show that when Britain and other colonizing countries came to pre-colonial Africa, the main things they were describing about how these people were barbaric, they were justifying that based off of how they were practicing their gender. Why are there these men in skirts? Why are there these people with wide hips? Why are there these people with big phallic penises? All these things are comments on gender, right? Black women, cis women, were put in cages and told that they were animals, justified off of the basis of the shape of their body, because a woman could not look like that, right? That is all about race, right? That is a racial issue. And so how can we decide that transness is separate from that? We can't, right? And so I needed a book that went in on that. But at the same time, right, the joyful side of it is because of the fact that I believe that blackness, whether you're cis or trans, is constantly being degendered or hypergendered. You know, this isn't being filmed or live streamed, so I can say the reality is that I think that black people all have a trans experience, because actually most black people under a white supremacist society are experiencing gender very differently to white people. They're not being seen as successful men or women because of the links to slavery and colonization. But the joy of that is that we've already broken the rules. And so when you meet other black trans people and black gender non-conforming people, you see what it means to live beyond rules. And because this book was about me struggling with this identity, struggling with whether or not these words were helping me, I had to take inspiration from black trans communities to be like, wait, we've been doing this and we've been using our own words. So I used the image of my black trans housemates that I lived with for 4 years, of us walking down the street and joined by all these different people from different pre-colonial countries and using all these different words for us. And it was a really, to try and imagine a black trans reader reading this and living in a country that makes it very hard to be us, right? It's hard, right? And for them to go, oh wait, there are spaces that I can find freedom and something else.
And that passage, for those of you who have read it and those who will come to read it, is such a dynamic and evocative passage in the book.
I loved it.
Yeah, I should have done. You should be very pleased with that passage.
I was like, all the rest of that, no, not all the rest, but it happened very slowly, and then when I got to that bit, I was like,
it flows, like, you can feel that. And I guess that gives me a great opportunity to be like, you write so poetically, probably unsurprisingly, given that you are a performance poet and a performer, you write so poetically, but something that, again, I think was very interesting is you take, as you're doing now, you take very complex issues and make them so accessible and sound like, so you communicate them in such an effective way. is that a conscious thing that you're doing? You deliberately trying to make your work, I guess, both poetic and accessible? Is that a style? I'm sure somebody who knows more about literature than me will be like, oh yes, this is this style. But they can tell me. But is that a conscious thing that you're doing, basically?
I think there were moments in the edit where I definitely, would get comments from my editor being like, this feels like an academic piece of writing, it doesn't fit with the rest, do you want to do this? And what was interesting is when that would be brought up, I was like, oh, I'm pretending to do something that actually isn't my voice. Like, I just write how I speak, and I just, write. I also, do love imagery, and I love that, for me, writing isn't just about the reader, it's also about me. It's about how I want to feel when I'm writing. And if you're writing about violence, a way to kind of make it feel better is to make it sound really beautiful and poetic, and make it, feel like... I spoke about this yesterday, but I don't want to repeat things I've said yesterday, because I'm in Scotland now.
They won't hear it. It's okay.
No, it's not okay. Scotland deserve more. They deserve more than...
Oh, you definitely do, but that's not your problem.
Well, I mentioned it yesterday, our imagination, but related to this point, I love art because it's a chance to imagine different things, and it's a chance to imagine situations in other ways. And I think to write poetically gives you the chance to imagine other ways that this violence can land, right? When someone harasses you, you don't always have the power to do what you wanted to do back. But in writing, you can use a more poetic or creative way to change that. But also, back to my inspirations, and I think we're teasing it now, but I love Audre Lorde, and I love James Baldwin, and I love bell hooks. That's kind of what made me fall in love with books. My mum was very clever to shove that under my door. I'm very lucky for that. And how they write fiction and non-fiction defeats the binary of fiction and non-fiction, right? They're constantly making us feel like any type of book has the power to be a creative writing exercise. And so I knew that if I was writing non-fiction or whatever they're going to call it, I had to do the same, and I had to make it feel like a creative writing endeavor, because otherwise, sorry, loads of people that I'm just really excited to see, so I'm geeking out. I love being at Fringe. So I had to do that as well, but I don't think it was intentional. But a big question that I always have when I'm writing these books is, there's no point writing a book that has a whole chapter set on a council estate, but you go and give it to your friends that still live on the estate and they can't fucking understand it. There's no point. Then you failed. Right? And that doesn't mean, I think sometimes that means that you take away nuance, and people have all these assumptions about working class people. No, we get it. We're having these conversations. But it's about unnecessary waffle or unnecessary, what to show that you're smart. I'm so glad you say it still feels accessible and nuanced, because that was literally the goal. I knew that I was going to go back to my state and give this book to gender non-conforming people that still lived there, that inspired me and I thought of when writing this book. And so they had to be able, and they're the harshest critics. Right, they ain't going to write good reads, but they will tell everyone on the Travis, this fucking book's shit, and they will just tell me. So if I'm getting them lost on the first chapter, then what's the point,
Mary, I realise I have no concept of what time is. For how many questions have I got? Time for more questions? Yeah, I know we started late. Okay, and then hand over to these gorgeous humans. Beautiful, lovely folks.
This is Dave.
It's cheap. That wasn't cheap. Got a laugh.
That was really good.
We've obviously explored elements of the book that are more painful, but something we mentioned earlier and touched on earlier is joy, and it's something that I think is often so left out of these conversations, is the fact that obviously queer people of black people of colour experience joy. We have moments of joy in our lives, and something that you talk so beautifully about in the book is joy, and particularly T for T love, trans for trans love is so gorgeous throughout it. Again, was that I'm guessing it was a conscious decision to bring that joy and that gorgeousness into it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, basically, obviously, the book's main arc, for people that haven't read it yet, which I don't know why I was saying you haven't, it's not out until tomorrow, so...
Fuck you!
Yeah, fuck you.
Lazy.
Do better. But, the book is about... The main arc is, what changes I want to make to my body, and is this happening because of them or me? And can I survive in 50 years being visibly gender non-conforming, or the non-PC way, which I think I use in the book sometimes, is looking like a man in a dress, let's be real. whatever that means. And in order to do that, I knew I had to examine love, because part of the things you lose when you're visibly gender non-conforming is love, from like strangers, from intimate partners, from desirability in queer community, like all of this. But I think so often when trans people have written about love in mainstream, importantly, they've archived the experience of relationships to cis men, because naturally those are the people that we experience intimate partner violence from, not always, but a lot of the time, trans feminine people, that is where we are. And I started writing that chapter, centering it around cis men. And then I realised that although, yeah, like I fucked a lot of cis men, sorry, for some reason, it doesn't matter when I'm in Fringe, even if I'm at a book launch, I just think I'm at a late night club. And that's what I'm realising. I'm like, I'm going to have a cigarette in a minute on this stage. It just, Edinburgh does this to me in August. But all of my long-term relationships were with trans people. And so why was I starting this chapter just talking about cis men when actually, like, all of my long-term relationships are trans people? It just didn't make sense. And when I was writing from trans people, yes, that doesn't mean it's escaping violence. That doesn't mean it's escaping sadness. Like, but it doesn't mean that was the start place. And I wanted to give a start place. Again, if I was thinking about my reader and going, this doesn't have to be a book. You know, the last chapter in the book is called This Is For Us, Baby, Not For Them. And that is literally a reminder, like, this doesn't have to be for cis people. That cisgender people can enjoy a book that doesn't have to be for them. And I was reading literature that wasn't for me intended as the audience, and I was learning and loving it. And so when I learned that, I was like, I need to write about trans love because it has changed my whole life, right? And it shows other possibilities, right? I think I mentioned it in the book, but 2 people in the book, 2 past lovers, text me a similar phrase of like, I want you to look pretty tonight. And one of them is a cis man, and the other's a trans person. I say in the book that when it's the cis man, I knew that that meant to shave, and I knew that that meant to wear a certain type of outfit. I knew that meant to cover my beard. I knew that meant to look more feminine in a trying to pass way. And I mentioned that with the trans person, that simply meant to look more like myself, right? That T for T love shows that when you lean into your gender, that doesn't mean you have to sacrifice love. That actually you can be more authentic and someone can desire you more because of that. And so, yeah, I had to write that because, again, back to the first question, I knew this book wasn't going to go away. And so what do I want to leave in the archive? I want to leave this experience that despite all the violence of the world, despite the fact we experience so much hate, we can still find love and build our own love within that. And yeah, I loved that chapter, so I'm so glad you mentioned it. And actually today, if you want to read an extract from the book, one of my exes is now a journalist and wrote a review of the book. And a quick Q&A that came out today. And I mean, it was fucking good, I hope so. But it shows that's another queer, you know, queers have different rules, you know, like why does an ex have to equal this horrible thing? Like it's such a trend. Someone took text me like, how fucking queer, you know, like, oh, you and your ex are showing old pics and but it's lovely. Like it's lovely because we learn so much about our genders through each other, right? And they're now like so authentically in their gender, and we both know that that's because of each other in some way. Yeah.
I think that's a pretty gorgeous place to leave it, in the sense I wanted to ask you about where do you want this book to sort of sit, and you wrote it a while ago, where does it sit for you now? But it sounds like you know. It sounds like it's where you want it to be.
No, let's lean on this one. That's a good question. I really just want it to be a book that I was really going through a crisis. You know, it's anyone that reads this book can tell. I was feeling so unsure about my gender and so unsure about it all, and I guess I just want a book that hopefully lets other people be unsure, and that like finding surety in our gender isn't like the goal. And so I hope that this book allows for like a messy imprint on what has sometimes felt like quite a stoic and rigid conversation. Yeah.
I think that, yeah, come on. It's just beautiful. Every word.
You've been great. You asked great questions.
Thank you.
Before we go to Q&A, can you just plug your 2 shows? No, I mean it, because I'm going to be naughty and I'm going to have a cigarette, because I did my my trains were delayed and I came straight here and I need a cig.
Okay,
But
I'm covering for you.
But
I'm covering
yeah,
for you.
Yeah, but
okay,
I
sure.
also want you to point your show, and I know you wouldn't do that if I just said that.
Yeah,
so,
you're so lovely. Through covering for Travis, which is exactly why we're doing this, I'm also here. I'm performing at the festival. I've got three shows. One show here at Lighthouse Bookshop from the 18th to the 21st of October. It's a queer POC retelling of an old Scottish legend. Thank you, Ambulance. No, God bless the NHS.
They're like, alert, it's a hot show.
It's so good. So that's a retelling of an old Scottish legend. It's sexy, it's fun, it's strange. It's here at Lighthouse Bookshop. And then the other two I'm doing at the Scottish Storytelling Centre. One's a kids show, deeply inspired by my grandparents' experiences of partition of India. Sounds very bleak for kids. There's a lot of levity to it. Don't worry, we're not just that.
What's it called?
It's called The Girl and the Dragon. Thank you very much. I'm great at my own PR.
Okay.
And the last one is called Mohan, a partition story, and that is an adult version of a retelling of the partitioning of India. The Girl and the Dragon's literally got dragons in it. It's very fantastical and sweet. The show about partition is about partition, but it's a storytelling show. It's set, both of them have music in it. They're both gorgeous. Come see them. Please. Thank you, Travis. Bless you. I think these lovely human beings, these wonderful folks, have sat here for so long, and I'm sure have a million questions to ask you. I have a million questions to ask you, but I'd be selfish to do that. Should we open it up to the floor?
Absolutely.
Or to the grass?
So awkward if after that someone's like, I've got no questions.
There's no questions.
Ooh, one at the back. Actually, you're going to have to come a little bit closer. And then I'm going to give you the mic. It's mostly for the recording. Yeah, it is recorded. My bad.
Oh, that's all right. I meant what I said.
I feel like I'm slightly the icebreaker here, but the question I feel like you kind of touched on but didn't dig into was about who inspired you, and I'd be really interested to hear more about that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole chapter that's setting the clubs, and I think that I was looking for trans literature to inspire me, and that's not to say there's not loads of beautiful trans literature, but I wasn't finding what I needed. And then I remembered that so much of trans theory is made in the clubs and in performance and out in action, and I was inspired by so many trans performers that I know. I thought about Sade, Skinny Bitch, R.I.P. She's called Skinny Bitch, that wasn't me calling her Skinny Bitch. And just how she was acting out her gender in real life. Like, this book is about being stuck, and I kept on coming back to the phrase that transness should be a verb, I should be doing it. And I think that trans queer performers are constantly showing us different ideas and identities around their gender, and so I was thinking about loads of performance artists that do that. David Hoyle was obviously a huge inspiration for me. Pete Burns gets a huge shout out in the book. And these people, again, are not necessarily people that someone would call trans, right? I was actually inspired by lots of, like, people that are just doing it and are just being as well. But in terms of literature, I mentioned James Baldwin is, like, a huge inspiration to me, and I feel that throughout the pages because of just how James Baldwin refuses to be defined by a form. And I feel like you can try and box Baldwin's work into how you would categorize something, but he's constantly reminding you not to do that if you're actually reading it. And I felt at some points trapped by non-fiction, and I felt like reading James Baldwin alongside the book reminded me that that's just another label that can be fucked. I can be none of the above about the form too. Ugh.
You told me
Yeah.
Another question. Yeah, there's one back. Yeah, but not for the mic.
Oh, yeah, the recording. Yeah.
I don't know the microphone. Hello. Congratulations, Travis. You're an icon of mine. I want to know, within that particular question, because I'm finishing a book at the moment and it's bloody hard, to be formless and to kind of, I mean, I've been trying to describe it as a dreamlike sequence of the way that it's kind of pouring out of me. Did you get, like, the doubt because it's not that strict or academic? Did you ever have any interesting conversations with people who, not necessarily an editor or your editor, but like around that are in books, quote unquote, that made you feel like that freedom factor, wasn't allowed?
100%. Because I'm a kid of the internet, I obviously recorded my whole process on my photo booth on Mac. Once a Tumblr kid, always a Tumblr kid. And I have all these videos that I would take after, like, every other day of writing where I talk to the laptop and say how I was feeling and what I was doing, and so much of it is just doubt until like really the last 4 months of writing it. It's just, oh, I can't do this, I don't know what's happening, I can't see it. And yeah, I think a lot of authors' advice sometimes felt quite mathematical, and I was like, well, I need to take their advice because I've never written a book. And it was leaning into that, and I know your work, we're artists, we've done this before in other ways, and what was freeing for me was remembering that I have told stories before, and we know how to tell stories, and I've got an instinct on how to tell stories, and this is just a longer story. So structure was important. I did have to learn some things. I did have to plan more than I normally would, but also I felt like I kept on being like, I have done this before in different ways, and a book is scary because we think only certain people can write them, or we think that only certain people get success on them. But I kept on being like, actually the books I love is when the person is just so themselves. And I was like, no one can teach me how to be me, you know, I just got to feel it. So that definitely brought it back, yeah.
Is there another one? While you're thinking, I'll plug, can you come on the side? Check out the Sun Shack. Jem's done really cool things at Summerhole.
Yes.
And there's Jem's Jams, so look it up.
Yeah.
Hi, Travis.
Hello. Is it actually weird coming up to the front to it?
No, it is weird, but it also, I like it. It's not like kind of like, it's like kind of coming up to a sort of stage. Yes, my question's a bit random, but I was actually wondering what kind of music you liked, or like if that influenced your writing at all.
Love that. Do you want to say stood for this? No. Oh, okay. Great. Yeah. Amazing. We can set that up as the vibe. Thank you. I love music so much. I'm a huge music fan. I listen to loads of music. What was so weird about this process is, like, normally when I'm doing plays or creative writing, I make a playlist. I put out playlists. Overflow's got a playlist online. Burgers has a playlist online. This does not have a playlist. The soundtrack was silence. I tried really hard, and it just wasn't working with this particular piece of work. It was distracting. It didn't quite fit. In the edits, though, I was listening to a lot of, like, this sounds like beggy, but it was true, like weird, like, techno music and quite, like, trancey stuff, because I felt like the edits were, like, kind of making me a bit trippy. And so I was like, okay, I'm kind of, like, tripping out a bit. The only time there was a soundtrack was the clubs. I just played loads of, like, Cabaret the Musical started playing, loads of just camp classics, loads of, like, drag queens singing. So that chapter had a load of music. But the rest, maybe that was why I was so sad for writing some of the book, is I just didn't listen to anything but my own voice. I was in a house with 3 cats, though, and whenever I had the laptop out, they would jump on the desk. So they would also meow for my attention. So that was maybe a soundtrack too, yeah.
Is there another one? Yes, I think I can reach you. And I saw you at the back. I'll do you next. Actually, when they're done, if you come down the side.
Thanks very much. Thanks to you both for a really beautiful chat. I wondered if you see this text as having like a performative quality to it, like your plays, or do you imagine sections of it being performed, or is that a life you would like to see for this text, or is it important that it is what it is as this different kind of work for you?
Yeah, I mean, everyone else is welcome to perform it if they want to. I think a text can live on and do what they need to do. There's definitely scenes in there. I think someone could do a good couple sketches from it, but not me. I think I've had some, like, interest from people that have said, oh, should we stage some of this? I think I'm quite particular about form, and I really, like, lean into when I'm doing a new form, and so much of my career has been about trying new things, right? Like, it's interesting that now everyone associates me with theatre, but really I didn't know how to do that until I tried it, right? Burgers was a club show first, and so when I lean into a form, I'm like, this is this form, and so I personally don't really want it to be adapted in any of that way, just because I can't see it. But if someone comes along with a good idea, you know, then maybe, but yeah, I think I'm quite specific about when I'm writing for something, and this feels like a book. And I love that. So yeah.
You maybe touched on it with the 3 cats, but what was your kind of like looking after yourself and support group through this? Because also the idea that you're doing this in a pandemic is a lot.
It was wild. Well, not the fucking cats. They weren't a support at all. They were annoying as hell. I'd feed them and then they'd still... And because I was getting up early to write this, or like to pretend I was writing it for the first 3 hours, I always fed the cats because I was living with my friend that owns the cats, but she would wake up late in the pandemic, as she should, and I was waking up early, so the cats really started associating me with feeding. So they definitely weren't a help at all, a hindrance actually. I would have made the original deadline. No, I actually didn't extend the deadline. That was a cheap joke. My friend that I lived with, it was perfect. I can't. They get a huge shout out in the acknowledgements to hear like the words for it, but I can't imagine writing it in my current I live on my own now, and it would have just been so hard. And the fact that at 6 p.m. I finished every day, and that was my rule. It didn't matter where I felt at it, didn't mean whatever. I finished at 6 p.m. and we went and had dinner every night, and then we'd watch... I'd never watched Game of Thrones before, and so we started Games of Thrones in lockdown. She'd watched it before, and we'd just like chat shit and watch Game of Thrones, second lockdown, get a bit high, stop that for third lockdown. Yeah, that was it. And what was amazing is like she cares about the book now, but she did not have an ounce of care about it when I was doing it. She never asked me anything about it. And at first I was a bit like, I'm doing this really important thing. But like, it was really amazing. We'd go down to dinner and like no one would ask. She lived with her parents and none of them would ask how it was. Like, and I kind of imagine, I don't actually know many other friends I'd have that wouldn't want to be like, and how was it today? Or like, and at first, yeah, it was a bit rude. And then like 2 months in, I was like, this is amazing. Like, you genuinely don't care what I'm doing upstairs. And it was a blessing. We would just eat and chat, and every night we did have the best time. Like, it's weird saying that about lockdown. I know that requires a lot of privilege to have had a good time during a time when so many people were struggling, so I know that. I'm also not going to lie, like, I had a nice setup and I had a great time. My friend let me stay in a nice house and write a book, you know? And she'd always remind me when I was moaning, she'd be like, babe, we got 2 friends that are nurses. You're upstairs writing a book in my really nice house. And I'd be like, yeah, you're right. So that helped, yeah.
I think we've got time. Yeah. I'm going to have to ask you to come forward a bit. Sorry. Hi. I'm a teacher and for primary kids, so like little babies, and I try to like scaffold and facilitate conversations about like transness, gender, race, all those things. If there was one thing in the book that you would want young people to be having a conversation about, like what would that be?
Not the chapter on sex.
We'll talk about it now. They're very much aware. They ask me about my period all the time.
Oh, do you know what it is? The position to change. I think actually the main theme throughout the book, and that like change is a natural part of us, and that like changing our mind isn't a bad thing, and that also there's power in naming yourself, and then there's power in changing your mind about what you've named. And what I love about the fact I've been able to go into schools recently, like not loads and mainly secondary school, but I've got a friend with a young kid and they are talking about these things way more than like any of us were. I mean, you know this more than me, like they're thinking about it, and I just hope that they know that they can make these decisions about themselves and they matter and they should be taken seriously when they name them, and then they can also change their mind, and that's fine too. I think there's this such, I try to avoid talking about trans kids in this book process because I don't mention really kids in this, and also because obviously it's what everyone, not you, but the press and all of that want to talk about in a negative way. You're asking in a positive way, right? But I think one thing I think about it is like how beautiful that children are having their autonomy, right? They are autonomous beings too, right? Some of that autonomy like shifts and they've got responsibilities and stuff, but they know themselves in that moment and they should be taken seriously in that moment. And then they might still say the same thing in 10 years, and great, we listen to them. But also maybe if I was going to say something in the book is that they can then change and their past is respected too. Yeah.
Is there one more? Oh, yeah, come on.
Hello, legend. How would
get high. Speaking of drag queens. I'm glad there's one of us here. I'm sat in the back. Like, this is also my garden next door, so I'm just like, oh, just another day. That's something you want. Are you here to promote? Can you promote whatever you're doing here as well? I'm guessing you're doing some shows. I mean, I can do. Please, go before the question because you're not. Sure. I'm a local drag queen called Mystica. Hi. I run a monthly cabaret called Glamour on the first Monday of every month, but we're every Monday during August because queer tourism. Let's just take advantage of that. Yes, hello. And basically, I think, first of all, congratulations on everything. And I really enjoyed what you were saying about the sort of doubt and the sort of fluidity of, like, oh, I'm non-binary, but what if I'm not? And, the sort of shiftingness of it all. And I really enjoyed what you're saying as well about the doubt of, should I be writing this book? Is this a struggle? Because sometimes as artists we feel like, oh, well, they've made it. You're giving an artist talk about your book and all these things. And basically I just wanted to ask about things like imposter syndrome and, how you sort of work through it. Because I've been feeling it, but then also almost going, oh, that's a sign that everything's okay. Up to a point, like, oh, right, there's a reason for this. And I just wanted your thoughts on that, basically.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks for coming here. I feel it all the time about different things. It doesn't go away. And of course, you're right to name the projections I think people have on. We're always watching other people, right? And we're always going, oh, they must have this all sorted because they're doing this or that. And that's not to avoid that I know that I'm lucky and privileged to make a living off my art, and that is something that I don't ever take for granted because I spent many years not being able to. But I think the imposter just shifts when you go into new spaces, right? Like, I think that I had a goal. I wanted this work to be read in our clubs, but also my goal when I was in the clubs was like, I feel like I can do this in different spaces too. Like, that feels like my skill. And that comes with a lot of imposter syndrome because I'll be real, like, putting out a book that requires press in this current state of what UK press is absolutely terrifying because these institutions don't want you to thrive, right? Like, you might have individuals that are great, and I've been lucky to have that, but, I'm putting out an extract in The Guardian that's complex, right? Because all of my friends are saying, fuck The Guardian, right? And I am too, right? Looked over to my team like, oh, I was, until I had an extract in there. But, right, that's the game. You have to work with these people that also are being shit to you and don't want you to be there, and you're walking into spaces and going, are these people thinking I'm a joke? Are these people thinking that I haven't actually written this? Or are these people thinking all of this? All of those doubts come in, but what helps me push past it, and I actually do mention imposter syndrome in the book. I use a comparison about imposter syndrome about work to talk about imposter syndrome about gender. The only person that loses in imposter syndrome is you, right? Like, that is the only person. It's an internal thing that has only an effect on you. And I'll be damned if I let these people rob me of doing what I want to do, Like, absolutely not. Oh, yeah, you can clap. Okay. That's it, baby. That's it. Can I just hear someone go, oh, love. Well, I can use this to say, remember, I'm doing a cabaret tonight, 11:30, at the Roundabout. It's got Sophie Hagen, incredible queer comedian, Baby Lame, an amazing drag performer, and a local star, Alfina. Oh, fuck. Afina. I'm really bad, I'm out of it, but Afina. Purina Alpha, yes, thank you so much. Purina Alpha, who I met at a club performance 3 weeks ago at Trans Pride. We didn't have any more space for any lineup, and I said we have to make space because I saw her performance. She is truly incredible. She's a Scottish black trans drag queen. So if you're up late at 11:30, come along. There's loads of tickets left. So come along to that. We'll be doing more club-like things. So yeah.
Huge round of applause for Travis, please, everyone.
Thank you,
Travis. Thank you so much.
I'm going to be signing books, aren't I?
Yeah.